This is Nona. In this expert report, I will discuss observations, a method to data collection. Let's begin with an overview of observations. Observations are a way of gathering data by watching the behavior of an individual, noticing events, or noting physical characteristics in their natural setting. I want to comment that researchers can choose to observe participants in a laboratory setting as well. But one of the benefits of observation is that you can determine behavioral patterns in a natural setting. Researchers watch these behavioral patterns to obtain information about the phenomenon of interest, and sometimes these observations can guide future method designs of research. Remember that people do not always do what they say they are going to do, and so researchers can learn additional information by just watching what is actually going on with the subject. In a classroom observation, the researcher would use data from observations in the classroom, and the data gathered include programs, practices, or strategies. And in a learning walk type of classroom observation, there is no feedback given to teachers. So the learning walks are designed to just provide information regarding patterns that are exhibited in classrooms throughout a school. I want to clarify that a performance observation or evaluation by an administrator always provides feedback for a teacher so that the teacher can learn from his or her review. But this observation and general learning walk would not give specific feedback to teachers. Again, it's best to have multiple observers who have previously discussed and practiced how to record and collect data. This ensures inter-rater reliability. Here are some characteristics of observations. In an overt observation, everyone knows that they are being observed. A covert observation describes an observation when the subject or subjects do not know they're being observed. And of course, this is less common due to ethical concerns. Now, a direct observation is when a researcher is watching the interactions, behaviors, or processes as they occur. So if a researcher observes the teacher delivering a lesson, he or she could determine whether the lesson has been delivered with fidelity. An indirect observation, on the other hand, occurs when one watches the results of interactions. For example, a researcher could measure the amount of food wasted by students eating at a school cafeteria in an effort to determine whether that new food item was actually consumed and appreciated by students. Finally, observations can occur in a laboratory setting. As we mentioned before, these observations occur inside the confines of a research lab. An example of this type of observation would be the researcher noting the behavior of children through a one-way window in his laboratory. Now, a naturalistic observation includes observations that are carried out in the real world. Just watching the behavior of children in their actual school classroom is an example of a naturalistic observation.
Hi, so this is Kay now, and I'm going to go into depth with the examples of practicing observations. So usually you could use these when you're analyzing the workspace or the physical environment and asking questions such as, is this new training facility conducive to learning? Is the furniture adjustable and movable to perform multiple functions used for teaching and learning? Basically, how does the students respond to the space, and is it part of their learning experience? Observations for interactions to gather data between two or more persons. Questions are, how does the teacher gain undivided attention from the students and vice versa? When are students given the opportunity to interact with each other? So what is the relationship between each peer, between authority versus not? Do they get chances to work because they're a lot of the time, or do they do this during their seat work, etc. Observations are also used during situational activities to understand an ongoing situation or process as it occurs. So for example, how do staff and students respond to fire drills? How productive and attentive are students after recess and lunch? So thinking about time frames and how protocols are set up to see the effective influence on student learning. And then behaviors, so observing behaviors, identifying individual actions and emotional responses. So for example, how long can students stay focused during seat work before they become restless? Or how do students behave when the teacher is not circling the room, when the teacher is at their desk, or when teacher is working with someone else? How are these students working, and how productive are they? Okay, so observations are basically used to be able to identify all these things that one individual would be able to provide the answer to. And here on this page, basically we have two resources linked here to give you an idea of the kind of questions or guides that you could use during observations. So the first document here basically provides a checklist and a space to make additional notes. Further down, you're given guiding questions and what to watch out for, and then you can write out the situation as it comes. And then if we go back to the observation slides, so there was a second link here, and if you click on it, basically it takes you to a website which gives a more in-depth guide of how to do or how to rate observations. And if you just click on their download, this is a tool for conducting Common Core aligned classroom observations, and you just sign up and it's free to get the document. And I'll just quickly show you what the document looks like. So it comes out like this. It gives you, again, how to rate it or how to answer these questions. So are all students engaged in the work of a lesson from start to finish? And you would rate them 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5, depending on the guide they've given you. And same with these following questions. At the end, there's a little sheet where you would take this with you to the observation. The questions there are all students engaged in work of a lesson from start to finish. And then you would rate it and give the details. So in this next part, I will be discussing the strengths and drawbacks of observations. In terms of the strengths, we can see that observations enable researchers to notice more deeply the activities going on around them. It can lead to more quantitative studies. It can be used to gather evidence of actual rather than reported behaviors. It does not rely on people's willingness or ability to provide information. It allows you to collect data where and when an event or activity is occurring, and it provides valuable insight into how programs, strategies, and practices are being implemented. Now, these strengths exist only when the following have been conducted thoroughly. So first, a focus needs to be determined. What are the evaluation questions that need to be answered? So select 2 or 3 of those as a focus. Then create a system on how to collect the data. So either recording sheets or checklists, which includes predetermined questions and responses that can be described in advance, and it collects quantitative data, or you could have a running record or field notes that does not contain preset questions and responses, but collects qualitative data. Now, if there is a combination of the two of these are called observation guides, which allow you to utilize the question and responses along with room to have additional notes. Once established, you need to now decide on how many observations of one area should be observed, and then how many different areas need to be observed. From there, you will obviously need some people to conduct the observations. How many of them will be conducting them? Will they be trained according to the complexity of the situation observed to gather data that is consistent and of high quality? Okay, so that needs to be dealt with. And then finally, of course, observations could be done in a continuous process or during set periods. So examine only components that answer evaluation questions rather than wasting times and collecting data that has no relevancy. So of course, there are a few factors in between that needs to be covered, but this was the general idea of how to conduct an observation. In terms of the drawbacks, observations are susceptible to observer bias. It may also influence those observed to perform better or to behave differently. This is known as the Hawthorne effect. And as you can see here, if you're observed, you're very well behaved, but or not so. And then when it's observed, you can see here that no one is meeting the expectations. Further drawbacks, observations make it difficult to assess preferences and opinions from observation alone. It does not increase our understanding of why people behave as they do. And observations are time-consuming, and although generally inexpensive to perform because it's just sitting and recording, it may require the funding needed to hire additional staff to cover classes of the staff pulled out to make the observations, or even to hire those to come in and do the observations. So it could be costly. So in summary, the primary purpose of observation is to describe. The type of information you collect depends on design of your observation research. So again, it could be overt or covert, direct or indirect, laboratory or controlled setting versus a naturalistic setting. It is dependent on your questions and the tools you use to collect the data. And also the data collectors need to be trained to collect the information systematically and aware of observer bias.
For the last part of our presentation, we would like you to conduct an observation of a video. There are 3 different forms that you can fill out. You can pick any of the 3 forms by clicking on these particular links. Actually, in your case, if you don't have access to our Google slide, you can just copy any of these links to a web browser and it will take you directly to a form. For example, if I click on this one, or if you were to copy this into a web browser, it would open this observation form. In this observation form, what you'll be required is to watch the video and then answer this questionnaire below. Once you're done, you will go ahead and submit this to our Google Sheets. Afterwards, if you'd like to see the responses that you went ahead and put in, you can click or paste this onto a web browser and it will take you into the spreadsheet. Now the interesting part about this is that since we're going to have a lot of responses, we have actually 3 different types of forms on the spreadsheet. Form number 1 asks a specific type of question, form number 2 asks a different type of question, and then form number 3. Depending on the form, your information will be filled out on these 3 tabs. Now, what we would like you to do is after you complete one of the 3 forms is once again to go into this URL so that you can compare your observations to other classmates, not only based on the same type of observation rubric, but also based on how one rubric would give you one type of information versus another one. Okay, so once again, what we would like you to do is copy one of these into a web browser, watch the video, conduct the observation, then go into this Google Sheet and compare your answers to answers of other classmates. All 3 forms have exactly the same video. The only difference is how we actually conduct those observations. There are different ways to conduct the observations. Thank you very much.